Hey, welcome to Cheaper Jeeper TV. On this week's episode, we're going to do how to four-wheel drive question and answer. So stick around. Hey, welcome to Cheaper Jeeper TV. I'm Dino, your host. Glad to see you here. If you've seen this video, you know it's been a very popular video. In fact, it's my most watched video on the whole channel. And there were so many questions in the comments section, I thought I'd do a follow-up video where I answer your questions. So let's get started. Okay, well, let's take it inside a little bit here where it's a little warmer, and we'll just continue the video in the Cheaper Jeeper TV studio. Now, as I said, this video is a response to the how to use four-wheel drive with Selec Trac video that I made a while back, and it would really help if you saw that video first, because everything in this video is basically a response to the questions in the comment sections of that original video, and the kind of thing that would have been great to also have had in the original video, but it wasn't. So now we'll do this follow-up, and it's going to be thanks to the questions and comments that you made in that video. So by all means, feel free to go to check that one out first. I'll also have a link to it in the description section, but let's get started. Let's have a look at some of the questions now here on the screen. The first question here from Mason, where he feels stupid for not knowing this. Well, to be honest, when you look at the number of people who watched that video, Mason, we're not alone and we're not stupid. We're just trying to find out how to use these Jeeps because they're new to us, and it's good to be able to have a place to go and find out what you need to know. So you're in good company, Mason. Let's get on with the first topic, and you'll see I grouped these questions into topics. So you can see this first question is about driving your Jeep around in town, and Jason wants to know what gear or what position should his transfer case be in when he's just driving around town. Well, most of the time for me, I have it in 2H, because even when it's snowy out, with good snow tires and the clearance that the Jeep provides, and if you're going at a reasonable speed, the 2H is a good enough setting for your transfer case to be in to be able to help you get around town. If you're just driving around town and it started to get really snowy and slippery, you could put it in 4 auto if you have the Selec Trac option. If you don't, you could put it in 4H, but if you encounter dry pavement where you're going to be doing some turns and the such, I would take it out of 4H, because you could cause some damage to the gears if you're turning your Jeep when you have it in four-wheel drive. Okay, let's have a look now at the next question. This is from Sania, where she's asking, did she have to have the gear selector in neutral to put the transfer case into 4 high? And the answer to that is no, you can't have it in drive when you put it into 4 high. To my knowledge, the only time where you are required to have it in neutral is when you're putting the transfer case into 4 low. So I hope that was helpful. Let's go on to the next question. For this next category of question about dealing with the transfer case when the Jeep is stationary, we had quite a few people asking questions about that. Boy Too Quick, The Marvelous, Aussie1, and Kristen all asked questions related to that. And essentially, you can be in your two-wheel drive mode, 2H, and then encounter a situation where now you've stopped, but you had not switched into four-wheel drive yet. And are you able to do that? Because in the prior video, I was showing how you can easily switch into four-wheel drive when you are in motion. And yes, it is possible to put it into four-wheel drive when you are stationary. The gear can still be in drive, and you can go into 4H auto or 4H part-time just by moving the transfer case into gear. Should you have trouble with gears meshing, you can just move the Jeep a little bit to see if the gears adjust a little bit, that allow you to mesh the gears in the transfer case a little easier. But you can, while stationary, put the Jeep into four-wheel drive. Similarly, if you're driving and you pull in at night and you know when you get started in the morning that you're going to want to be in four-wheel drive, you can just leave it in four-wheel drive, turn off the Jeep, and in the morning when you start, the Jeep's in four-wheel drive and you can get on your way. So let's have a look at some other questions. Okay, now we have some questions on Selec Trac, and we see a question from Fran and Gia about leaving the transfer case, for those of you who have Selec Trac, in 4H auto all the time, and they were wondering if it would cause any issues. From my understanding and from reading on the forums, you can leave it in 4-wheel drive auto all the time. There are a few extra components and clutch packs that are engaged, but maybe if it's not necessary, you may not want to do that because it's just engaging more parts. And I know I've read on the forums some people claim it marginally can affect your fuel efficiency and the such. So I'm of the school of thought, if it's not necessary, it's better not to have those components engaged. But technically you can leave it in 4H auto or the Selec Trac mode all the time. But there are a lot of opinions about that, so instead of just going on my authority, I am going to have a link to a forum thread which is pretty lengthy where people share their thoughts on this matter. And you can see also there's a question from John about having it in 4H auto or Selec Trac at highway speeds. And again, I'll just defer to the forum thread where people suggest you can leave it there in highway speeds. However, it's not necessarily going to be helping your fuel efficiency according to some people on the forum threads. And again, if you're going at highway speeds, if you require the 4H engage, should you be going at highway speeds? That's another question. I would wage on the side of caution about if you're able to be going at highway speeds, you shouldn't need to be in 4-wheel drive. But if you do need to be in 4-wheel drive because of the conditions, maybe you shouldn't be going at highway speeds. So food for thought there. All right, let's move on. So now that we go and look at our next question, there were quite a few people asking about what's the maximum speed that you can keep your Jeep in 4-wheel drive. And I still go back to what I just finished saying, in that if the conditions are such that you need 4-wheel drive engaged, well, then you shouldn't be going at highway speeds. But if you're able to be going at highway speeds, then you shouldn't really need to have 4-wheel drive engaged. I know for me, when I start going onto a highway, I kind of gauge what the conditions are like. If the conditions are dicey, I'll have it in 4-wheel drive, but I'm not actually going at full highway speeds in those types of conditions. I guess that's the nice thing about having Selec Trac, is that you can leave it in the Selec Trac 4H auto option and it just manages or engages as required when it detects wheel slippage, for example. And in keeping with the theme of using the 4H auto or Selec Trac, there's a question here from Diane where she's asking, if I don't have Selec Trac, can I just switch from 2H to 4H when needed myself? And of course you can do that. And again, the only caution is when you are in 4H, should there be a dry patch, as long as you're going straight, you're not going to be in a condition where you're going to be turning and causing gears to bind and the such. It's only going to be a problem for you if you are needing to turn and you encounter some dry pavement, because if you are in 4H and you have to turn, you're going to cause binding of the gears. But it is totally okay while you're driving to switch between 4H and 2H as needed. And then you could see in these questions here from Donovan and Jamie that they discuss how the shifting of their transfer case seemed to be a little more laborious than as what was demonstrated in my earlier video. And that's why in that video I was discussing how when you're switching the transfer case, if you're on a roll, the gears might mesh a little better for you, even though you can do it while stationary. Now, from what I have read online, some people who maybe aren't using their transfer case lever very much will find it stiff, but as you use it a little more, the linkages loosen up. But I want to talk to you a little bit more about that in the tip segment, so make sure you stick around for that. And now we'll talk about some questions that people had about using 4-wheel drive in the rain. So you can see here we've got a couple questions, one from Paja and Paramjeet, and the questions revolve around, can I have it in 4-wheel drive 4H on the highway when it's rainy? And another question related to when the tires are starting to slide on wet roads, should you go in 4-wheel drive? And essentially, when we're talking about wet roads, the key factor there would really be the types of tires you have. Now, there's lots of literature on the tires, and the key thing when you're talking about rain is how soft the compound is of the rubber and perhaps the design of the tread that gives the tire more grip. Having it in 4-wheel drive on the highway in the rain isn't going to necessarily give you more grip in a safety point of view. For example, you could be in four-wheel drive on a wet highway road going at highway speeds, and when you need to stop, it doesn't matter if you're in four-wheel drive. If your tires aren't good quality tires with good compound and give you good grip, you're going to have a problem on your hands. So now let's move on to the next question here, dealing with the topic of going in reverse. We've had some questions about is it possible to have it in four-wheel drive and go in reverse? And as you can see in this image here, I am going in reverse and I am in four-wheel drive, and it is totally okay to go in reverse when you're in four-wheel drive if you need it to be going in reverse. So let's move on to the next question. Here's a question from Joe regarding tire size, and he's asked if you move up in tire size from the stock wheel size, do you have to do anything with the transfer case? And the answer is no. Technically though, if you go to a significantly bigger tire size from stock, you do have to use something like the ProCal unit, and I did a video on that. And there's the JScan app, and I've done a video on that, on how you need to adjust the speedometer in the Jeep, and so that your transmission and your speedometer all work properly with the new size tires. The transfer case doesn't need to be touched in a scenario like that. Okay, let's move on to the next question. So we have a question here from Do15 and Sunsea Surf 1000, and they talk about their Jeep hopping or skipping. And essentially, the only thing I'm aware of is that if you are in four-wheel drive and you're experiencing that, it's because you're on a surface that's not slippery, like a sandy soil, mud, or snow type condition. If the road is, say, wet, but the tires are still gripping, you will probably still experiencing gear grinding and hopping when you're in a turning scenario in four-wheel drive. Okay, that's the only thing I can imagine that would be causing you hopping. And if you are in some loose terrain scenario and you're still getting some grinding and hopping, then I for sure recommend that you have that looked at by a certified mechanic. So let's go on to the next question. You can see this one has to do with driving your Jeep in sand, and we have Duchess here, Duchess21, asking a question: what gear should you be in? I think he means what position should your transfer case be in. And you can totally be in four-wheel drive 4H high when you're on the sand, but there are a couple other things to keep in mind. The type of tire that you have will dictate the kind of experience you're going to have in the sand. But also, and very importantly, is that if you're going to go in sand, just like when you're going off-road, you need to air down your tires, possibly to 15 psi, to get better traction with the proper tires when you're in sand. But for sure, in sand, you can have it in 4H and not have any issues with hopping, because the sand is a loose surface, so your gears won't bind and the Jeep won't be hopping. Okay, so here's a question here about when you're on a very steep slope. The question's from Amy for him, and she's asking, well, what if you're on a very steep slope and dry pavement? What position should you have your transfer case in? And technically, you can have it in 4H, so that if there's any slippage as you're going up the steep slope, you got good traction because you're in 4H. As long as there's no turns, you should be okay. And you can have it in 4L if, for example, you're on a ramp pulling a boat on, you need that extra power, or the slope is that steep. So depending on your scenario, on a steep slope that's pavement, you can have it in 4H, you can have it in 4L. Just be careful that when you're coming up that ramp and you need to make a turn, that you might get some hopping or grinding of the gears if you're in a scenario like that. But yeah, you can have it in 4H and 4L on a pavement of steep slope if you need that extra grip in a scenario like I just said, pulling a boat. So I hope that helps. And the next question is from Lulfan, where he's asking, what is the function of the M plus and minus on the gear shift lever? And I explained that in the video on how to use 4Low when off-road, and I go through that in depth in that video. And you would use that mostly when you're off-road, you're in 4Low, and you're trying to get the Jeep over a steep obstacle or something like that. And if you're going down a steep slope and you want to control your rate of descent, you could be in 4Low and control with the transmission and the gears your rate of ascent or descent, or just give you better control of your gears and your transmission when off-road. So it's a big long explanation, and I'd recommend you check out that video, but in the long and short, that's what it's used for. But you can also be using that, say when you're on the highway and you're on a stretch of road and you just want to drop it down a gear, possibly to try to save some gas. And if the Jeep will handle that change of gear without struggle, you could do it in that scenario. But like I said, that's used mostly, however, when you're in off-road conditions and you want to have control over your four-wheel drive gear to go over obstacles. So check out that video. I'm thinking that you might get more out of that description there. So that's just a brief summary from the kind of questions that came out of that initial video. However, from these questions, I do have a couple extra tips that I'm going to talk about in our tip segment.
Now for some cheaper Jeeper tips.
Okay, now given the season that we're in right now, I know a lot of you are just chomping at the bit to get your Jeep out there in the snow and have fun with it. And you can see in this picture here where I was bringing the Jeep into a nice deep snowy area, and it's a lot of fun. However, when you're done, a good thing to do is check your rims to see if there's any packed snow in the rims, because if you don't clear it out on your way home and you're driving down the highway, you're going to have some wobbling or wheel balance issues, because the packed ice and snow in your rims will offset the balance of your tires, and you'll know that when you're driving down the highway. So just a little tip to remember to clear out your rims if you're out playing in the snow.
Plus, another tip shared with me by an avid Jeeper is when you get your Jeep rust-proofed, it helps keep the linkages in your transfer case from rusting and seizing, thereby allowing shifting of the transfer case to happen a lot easier.
So now let's move on and hear what our subscribers have to say.
And now for subscribers' tips. This week's subscriber tip comes from the diesel heater update video. Hey Cheaper Jeeper TV, I think it's useful to have the room to hold the fuel during transport, but you should pull the fuel out of the case during usage, just to be safe. Signed, Eric. Hey Eric, great tip. Not only does it make it more safe, but it allows me to remove the tank to fill it and not worry about spilling fuel in the case. Thank you very much.
And if you have subscriber tips that you'd like to leave in the comments section below, please feel free to do so, as they may make it in an upcoming episode. Hey, that's it for this week's episode of Cheaper Jeeper TV. I hope that you found it interesting, and if you did, how about giving the video a thumbs up? And if you're new to the channel, please feel free to hit the subscribe button and the alert bell so you'll be notified when the next video is released. Until the next time, I'm Dino for Cheaper Jeeper TV. Be well, stay safe, take care.